Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today we'll actually be talking about nuclear stuff. We almost never actually talk about anything nuclear, so to touch upon that subject, it gives me a little chill. I'm here with my partner in nuclear submarine technology, as in he and I are going to make a kind of like those tiki boat bar tours, only it's going to be a submarine where the whole inside is just a big bar, and we take people out to get drunk and enjoy their time. And maybe it'll be a submarine with windows or without, I don't know. We don't want it to explode. That's our number one priority. But yeah, I was thinking if we can build submarines, because he is a submarine builder, let's make a bar experience because I think that's the best thing we could do if we were had the knowledge to build a submarine. But joking aside, I am here with Mr. Kenneth Woodward, who I met at Podcast Movement DC. So we are connecting after several months of having it's been a while, but my this was always on my to-do list. And I was just trying to think of the right questions to ask because he is the questions master. No one knows questions better than him. One could say he's good at curating questions, and we'll get into what that means later on today. But Mr. Woodward, so great to have you here today.
It is a joy to be here, my friend. It's fond memories of our conversations here in DC, and been looking forward to this opportunity.
Yes, sir. You in particular, I remember, told me a story that I have in my list of best sea/land stories from the Navy, which was you were awarded. You were given an award at
That's
Captain's Mast, and that was
that is
something I'll never
correct.
forget.
Well, that was because the idea was, or the backstory was that this was during submarine school, or actually post-submarine school, and had done boot camp Great Lakes, and then went to Groton, Connecticut for all the submarine school. And during basic electronic rate training, or BERT, that was where we were all getting educated on the electronic side of things. I was continually late. And there was a particular petty officer that was Petty Officer Montgomery. Yes, just remembered his name. He was determined that he was going to fix me. And so I overslept coming to night study. And so I was awarded, or I went to captain's mass, and I was docked my pay 50 times two. So $50 over two pay periods. That was a lot of money back then. And then I was awarded correct 30 days in correctional custody unit. So the reason I was awarded was because they thought that there was perhaps some hope for this poor sot, and otherwise they would have just kicked me out. So therefore, the award, and then I had an opportunity to do the intense boot camp for 30 days.
It's you talk about being late continually, and there's a saying I know we have in the Navy, right time, right place, right uniform. So maybe you had not heard of that one. That's pretty straightforward. Right place, right time, right uniform. But yeah, so let's get into you mentioned there boot camp, you mentioned a place. You called it by the wrong name. I as far as my understanding, it's called Rotten Groton. That's I've never heard a sailor not call it that, so I'm not sure what Groton, Connecticut is. I believe you meant Rotten Groton, but I'd love for you to tell us, of course, the big question, why you joined, when you joined, and how that all unfolded.
It started with a girl. Well,
This is gonna be a
uh,
story.
yes. So how it worked out is that the grades were not stellar. We didn't have a lot of money, and a buddy of mine, a guy in this case, joined the Navy, and he was super confident. And then there was a whole bunch of us, or a whole bunch of the class that joined the Navy. And because of just his confidence of having something to do, some place to go, then that to me was very appealing. And since I didn't have a lot of options, so I was looking at the Navy, but my stepfather had retired out of the Air Force, And so it's kind of debating kind of those different directions. But then there was a girl named Susie, and she joined the Navy and wrote in my, she was a year ahead of me, and she wrote in my yearbook, see her around heading out into the Navy or something along those lines. And so I was like, maybe there's a chance. The Navy's a big place. There wasn't a chance, and I didn't have a chance either. But anyway, that was certainly a contributor to choosing the Navy. Yeah, and then initially it signed up a as an OS, but then had a medical problem, so I actually had shipped, got to MEPS, and they found a medical problem. Won't go into the details here. Have no problem sharing over a beer, but they were like, "Okay, nope, you need to go get this fixed." So they discharged, no connection to the Navy, and then uh, got it fixed, came back, and then went the path of the world of submarines.
Interested. I thought I was gonna go to the there was a girl back home you had to take care of, and around her neck she wore a yellow ribbon for Kenneth Woodward, who was far, far away. But it was quite
Nope,
the opposite. You were
nope, not at all.
chasing
And there
after.
was no glorious union or nothing. I just nope. Have no idea where she's at now or anything like that. Yeah.
And she wasn't on the submarine. I guess. Oh, I guess we know that
Yeah, we'll,
much.
we'll get to the submarine girl here in a moment, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, keep going.
It's funny. A lot of now there are a lot of young women in the military who make social media content in direct violation of UCMJ because it's not necessarily wrong to make content. There's a lot of guys who are military who run podcasts that are helpful for the enlisted, for veterans and their active duty or retired, and that's fine. But there are a lot of half-bloused women making questionable content in uniform with their nameplate,
Mm,
and there's also not just women. I've seen a lot of really stupid men in the military making really stupid content. I'll just say it straight how it is, and there's a lot of pages dedicated to just finding and serving this content. And they're always named like Outer Regs or something like that, you know.
mm,
Um, Point being, there's a lot of very attractive young women who claim to be military, and whether their pants are from Goodwill, because there's a lot of, NWs at Goodwill, or if they're actually in a service, a lot of young men are calling them psyops and propaganda, and that the
mm.
military is trying to use young, attractive women to get you to join, saying, because I've seen videos where it'll be a bunch of young, attractive women in half bloused in army gear saying, "Come join the army and crawl through the mud with us." And you had the you had the non-government funded version of that. You had the just high school sweetheart or hopeful potential future
Yeah.
sweetheart. Um, that you chased after. So that's definitely that's in the Hall of Fame of the couple of nukes origin stories. Most people said it was because the Air Force was closed.
Mm.
This definitely takes the cake on that one. So you ended up you chase after a woman, somehow end up a submariner, a submarine guy. So how very different very different outcome. Can you tell us about that? Obviously, for those of you who don't know who aren't in the service, you don't just get forced onto the submarine. You need a certain personality, first of all. You need certain medical requirements you have to meet, and it is volunteer. And so you chose to go submarine route. Why did you choose to go that way?
Financial reasons, purely financial. Because when I had come back to the recruiter after I'd gotten things taken care of, and my scores were good enough on the electronic side or on the technical side. And they said, would you be interested in going submarines? And I'm like, and I was growing up in Arizona, kind of central Arizona, so nowhere near the water. And they're like, would you be interested in submarines? And I'm like, why would I want to do that? They said, they'll pay you extra. And I said, all right, submarine sounds good. And so that was there was the Top Gun was all about flyboys, and the submarines were not as, their Hunt for Red October and such hadn't come out yet. So there wasn't any of that kind of sexy stuff that went with it. So it was purely financial. It was an extra $45 a month or something like that. Yeah,
That's 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 pretty good. Yeah, I know one of the incentives definitely, at least from, when I was joining, they talked about how, if you did, submarine, it was easier to rank up, it was higher pay
that's
and
true.
all of
Yep,
that. And
absolutely.
my favorite was my roommate joined a submarine because he, quote, didn't know how to swim. And so he feared the idea of drowning, but the idea of implosion and vaporization and being crushed to death was much more appealing to him. So,
I mean, if you're running the odds, you know, the odds are your odds of drowning on a ship or from a ship anyway are probably greater than getting, vaporized in a crushed submarine. I mean, you got to look at all the numbers,
oh
but
yeah, no,
I
I
think you're still
agree.
running I think you're still running good odds.
Yeah, because all you need to do is end up overboard and then
Yeah.
that's it. And of course it'll be at midnight when I'm about to sleep after standing watch all day and
Yep.
man overboard. You know how it is. We had I remember we I a bunch of people had just finished because nuclear side we do a lot of midnight watches while everyone else is sleeping and we were all about to hit the hay and man overboard, XYZ. A shipyard worker or a marine on our ship
Mm,
had decided to just throw their hard hat over the edge and watch it float down.
wow.
So someone saw the hard hat in the water and called it in. And there was a lot of very unhappy people. We once had took a whole hour to muster a man overboard because some chain of command hadn't reported that a sailor had gone home early for a civilian doctor's appointment or something, and we spent 45 minutes or so looking for said sailor,
Wow.
and they were nowhere to be found because they weren't on the ship. And so it took us an hour to do a man overboard, which is not record was it's record time and just
Yeah,
not in a
and
good way.
on the wrong way. Yeah, on the wrong side of
Yeah.
things. Wow.
Yeah, so you went from pursuing women to pursuing money, and that got you to the submarine.
Yep.
So what did that look like? What was, with what you can speak on, what was your daily life kind of looking like? What missions did you go on and all that?
So submarine radioman, and my so the boat that I picked up was the PCU Alexandria, so 757 boat. It was in the shipyard in Groton, and so picked her up. So this was in 1989, and I think she was commissioned in 90. I think that's right. May have been 91, something like that. So we spent time in the shipyard. She finished getting built, and then I didn't go on the first sea trials. I think it was on Bravo trials I went on, and then yeah, we in and out of port. So spent all the time on really the in and around the East Coast, and we did one med run. Um, so that was its first, yeah, the first med run, and that was a great experience. We can poke around there, but yeah, so spent 4 years on the boat or assigned to the boat. The first like year and a half was in the shipyard.
Every sailor's dream.
There we go.
Well, it depends. It depends who you are. So for me, like, ironically enough, I hadn't originally I was going Air Force. Well, actually, I was going Coast Guard Academy, and then I dropped
Okay.
that, and then went Air Force, and then they swapped rate on me day before I shipped out, and then I ended up going Navy, and I definitely never wanted to live on a ship or be deployed. So I was happy for the shipyards.
Mm.
But there are people who join up to quote travel the world, and then
Hmm.
they get stuck in Newport News for 6 years, and they hate it. And there are also a lot of people who join because the incentive to join is port calls, and then their port calls are canceled because aviation didn't do their test flights in time, or because there's a storm. And so
Hmm.
your 9 month deployment with a single port call ends up being a 9 month deployment with no port call. But it really depends on your chain of command. That being said, I want to get into just a little bit of submarine culture, if you can share some insight with us. I've heard a lot of stories about Arctic submariners. I've heard stories about jerry rigging together little quote RC cars and having them race each other whenever the boat tilts. So tell us a little, if you could share with us any Submariner exclusive activities that you participated in without self-incriminating too much.
Well, we didn't. Um, I was not on the boat for any of the exciting or the milestones of crossing the equator or anything like that.
Mm,
Some of the, or one of the kind of coolest, scariest kind of things when we going back talking about crush depth or vaporization and such was, we had tied a string across from the mess decks through the galley, right? So it's kind of going from either extreme ends of the diameter, right?
right, right.
Of the boat. And then you just put a washer in the middle on that string. And then when you would go deep, then everything would come in and, the washer would be much further down, right? It's a lot of slack in the line. And so it's just an indicator that that means there's a lot of pressure out there. And on that same token, there was the label plate going into the mess decks had a piece of metal in front of it. And depending on how deep you were, that piece of metal in front of it, because it's on a different structure on the boat, would actually be covering the nameplate because it may crush in by a couple inches. And so that was an indicator when you wake up in the middle of the night or just coming or getting out of the rack, going to the mess decks to get something to eat. That was a quick tell as to if we were deep or up closer to the surface. So that was that was
Wow.
kind of an interesting indicator of what was going on. I did have an opportunity. I led the photo team, and so when we were in one particular area, we were able to take the just large mosaics, if you will, of shorelines and the places that we were at. And then so I would come in and take over the wardroom, and I'm an enlisted guy, but we would take over the wardroom and make it a dark room and develop all the
Oh,
photos.
wow.
So we'd make these big panoramas, and they got passed around like these panoramas were like 6 feet long, and it was just pictures that we had made or developed and then cut and pasted together. So leadership could unfurl this big long photo and see what we were looking at. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that is pretty unique. Now, when you talk about going up and down the East Coast, did you stop anytime in Florida or South Carolina or anywhere?
Yeah, the places we pulled into is predominantly in Florida, in both Fort Lauderdale and Pecan or Port Canaveral. So lots of good memories of pulling into those ports. And then since we had the namesake of USS Alexandria, we were co-sponsored by the city of Alexandria, Virginia, and Alexandria, Louisiana. So so this was it would have been like 94. This was on my last time on the boat where we had gone down, pulled into Biloxi, Mississippi, and I think that was the first time that a boat, or at least certainly the 688 Eyes, had pulled into Biloxi. I believe that's the case. And then there was a big party up in, because Alexandria, Louisiana folks, they came down. So how we were looking at this was Alexandria, Louisiana was bringing all the food. Alexandria, Virginia was bringing all the money. So made for a great party. Granted, My buddies and I, we didn't stay there. We actually went over to New Orleans for a couple days, but that was my first, or that's how I got to New Orleans for the first time.
I was gonna say New Orleans. Yeah, tell me about that. Well, I got to backtrack before I get into that port call because I'm sure there's stories with that. You said Fort Lauderdale. Now,
Mm.
other Navy sailors on my show have called it Fort Lickerdale. What can you speak to that extent?
Lovely city. Uh, Liquor was definitely a part of it, but my favorite was going to Los Olas Boulevard and going to a jazz club down there
Ooh.
that was called something like Mare Bowls or something like that. It was like a French name. And that was, I don't know a lot about music and such, but jazz, that was where I first encountered it. And that was a lovely experience. Anytime that I was in Fort Lauderdale, that was a place to go. So Los Olas Boulevard is still a great place for shopping and such. I think the jazz club is long gone at this point.
Mm. So you would kind of just sit down in a nice big chair and get a drink and just have a relaxing evening.
Well, it was more like the high top things, but yeah, it was filled in. But yeah, getting to hear the live music there was fantastic.
Okay. Is it required to have a battle buddy to listen to jazz?
No, but they generally had the car, so therefore that was just as good.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get to New Orleans because that's definitely, if you're stuck between Groton, Connecticut and Florida, that's definitely something different. So what was that experience like?
At the time, the Anne Rice novels, Interview with a Vampire, and that series were really big. And I had enjoyed those books. So to be able to go to New Orleans, see the Garden District, see the homes, and the trees with the Spanish moss, and all those things very much brought those books to life. And there were three of us guys that had gone, and our wives, the plan was for all of our wives to come down and meet us. My wife didn't make it, but the other two wives made it. The the biggest memory or non-memory that I have is regarding the potency of hand grenades. So a drink down there on Bourbon Street that you could get in these little tiny inlet cuts just in the wall type thing. I had a couple hand grenades and I remember the cups, but after that, there's not really much of a memory that I don't know what was in them other than uh, what would clearly make the name applicable. Hand grenades, yes.
Was it served in a grenade looking glass or was it just called a hand grenade?
Like the little plastic cup had a picture of a hand grenade on it,
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah, it was not a fancy glass or it wasn't even
Okay.
glass. It's probably
Right.
wise because you're going to drop it
Yeah.
eventually. But yeah, it was just a cheap, probably 12-ounce little plastic cup. Yeah,
But technically you can say you handled hand grenades while in the military.
this is true. This
Which
is true. Yes.
wow, that's see, that's awesome. That's
As a
resume
Navy guy, I
writing.
handled hand grenades. That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, that's resume writing 101, leveraging your story. But we heard you say a SEO optimized word there. You said wife, so that drew my attention. We have to know, is your wife military? We have to know if you completed your ultimate goal in life or if you kind of ended up going down a different path.
Oh, this is even better, right? So this will probably go down on your board of great stories in
Perfect,
that
yeah.
she's actually a shipyard worker or was a shipyard worker, and I met her in the radio room. So how this worked out is that I made a commitment that there's no way that I would date a shipyard worker nor get married while I'm in the Navy. Those are two firm commitments. You probably know where this is going. So
Right.
the a evening I had midwatch. There was
Of course.
yeah, there you go. This is where it all happens.
Step one.
Yes. I because it was a radioman and this was a secure space, right? Everybody that's in there needed to have a quote red badge. You needed to have a security clearance to be in there, and not all the shipyard workers had that. But this particular cute redhead had a badge, a red badge, and it was her and another guy were in there cleaning. So she's a painter cleaner, and they were in there cleaning. It was their job. And then I had a good time chatting with her a little bit, but we didn't talk a lot. Then the next time that I had duty, I volunteered to take the midwatch. Um, and they're like, fine, fine. Yeah, you got the midwatch, but you're going to get bagged with having to pull up all the what's called, or it was the plastic covering all over all the floors because, we're getting closer to the
Yeah.
boat being done. And they're like, so it's going to be grunt work, but get it done. Got it. Well, the shipyard had tasked Linda to do the same thing. So we spent 8 hours working together. The other guy wasn't in there. So it was kind of a date almost. And then the next day, I told one of my fellow radiomen, I said, hey, don't make anything about it, but I really had a good time hanging out and getting to know Linda. And he was like, really? Okay. So that night, he volunteered for the midwatch and he badgered her the entire, so it was known as Woody, last name. He's like, you will go out with Woody if he asks you, right? And he badgered her the entire time. And so when I came
Battle
in
buddy.
that following morning, I he and a couple other buddies were just giving me grief. They're like, you better ask her out. You better ask her out. So I went down to the torpedo room just as she was getting off because that's where everybody had been gathering. And I said, hey, how you doing? And she said, oh, so this buddy of mine's name is Courtney. She said, so Courtney tells me you're too chicken to ask me out. And I'm like, oh, come on now. So I asked her out and we started dating in 1991 and got married a couple years later, and we are still married. Yeah, there you go.
That's a battle buddy, all right. That's interesting. Yeah, not often you find people saying, "Yeah, I love to do the midnight watch."
Yeah,
So,
you got to have motivations, right? So
yeah.
yes, and all of mine were just pure. It was national security is what first was foremost on my mind. Yes, of course.
Yeah, well, of course, the getting the ship ready for its duty. Yeah, for
Exactly.
sure. So that's very interesting. I think I want to ask again. So you talked about the sea trials and building up the submarine and seeing it come to life, which is a really cool experience to see everything you put together actually hopefully work, or most of it works, and then you fix what doesn't,
Yep.
and other stuff that did work stops working, so then you fix that and all that. But so how long were you on that for? Did you end up moving to a different sub, or that was just like your whole contract?
Right. So I did 4 years on the boat, and then just that only. So it became USS Alexandria because I went through commissioning, and then went to the schoolhouse and taught submarine radiomen and in the sea school. Did that for 4 years, and then I got out. So it was a total of 9 years that I was in, or 9 years and a couple of months, and predominantly because I had seen so many people get a divorce as a result of sea duty.
Mm.
And so it was the combination of that and the arrogance that I was going to make a bankroll because of the little education I had. But those were the factors that were the reason that I got out after nine. But otherwise, I enjoyed my Navy time and it was a very good experience. So, yeah, it was all good for me.
Well, I want to say, did you have anyone whispering in your ear, halfway to retirement, halfway to retirement? Did you think about that at all?
I thought about it, but I mean, in your 20s, 10 years is like
Sounds like forever.
forever, right? Man, I'm going to be ancient. Ah, that's so old. So that yeah, the two motivating factors for me were too strong for me to
Yeah,
stay. Yeah.
man. So you're a man who love motivated every part of your Navy career. Actually, it got you in, it kept
Exactly.
you in, and then it got you out.
Yeah. It may have been lust at the beginning, but love yes, yes. Yeah.
Right. So that's that's definitely very interesting. I know you talked about having a good time, which is great. A lot of people don't have the best time. Could you speak to any extent? I mean, did you ever struggle at any point with your mental health, with toxic leadership,
Mm.
with coworkers, or especially some mariners, not seeing the sunlight and, just that. I don't know if you were, I mean, we were in a different times, but I know like did you have it where you could send out emails occasionally on the submarine, or it was just radio silence for weeks? I mean, could you talk about that aspect?
Sure thing. And I appreciate you having this conversation. Regardless of my experience, I think that this is an important conversation to have. So for me, it was back in the day, and we only had family grams, so we did not have email on the boat. So it was one or two lines, and as a radioman, we were the ones processing it and the rest. So it,
Right,
it was limited. Now, because my wife is a little bit older than I am, that made it easier in that she had lived some life and she knew how to handle the things while I was gone. She was fully employed at Electric Boat. So there was less concern for me in particular regarding
right,
my wife or things on that front. Leadership wise, for the most part, it was, well, no, actually, I mean, like my chiefs were were good. Um, it was, not necessarily enjoying all the aspects. Yeah, there was, didn't like going back, having to scrub the bilge and, you know, um, so this is, it took me a while to get qualified submarines. So I was dink for a while, kind of going back. You probably see a trend with, sub school and getting a chance to be awarded CCU, but I wouldn't take my studies as seriously as I probably should have. And so it took me a while. Um, but that was also kind of self-imposed, right? If
right,
if I needed to do the work I needed to do, then you go do it. I did have a very clear memory of one time that we were getting racked out to go clean the bilges or field day, whatever it was. And everybody was getting out of the racks and grumbling and complaining. And I just said something like, it doesn't matter. It's a matter of how we look at this. And it's a mindset. And that just kind of quieted everybody down. And they're like, that's true. And this is what we're here to do. I mean, it wasn't like a glorious, Mel Gibson, kind of charging kind of a thing. It was just a recognition. And I'm not going to choose to be miserable if I have the choice. So this is why I think just mindset wise, why, and I don't know if it's just disposition. I couldn't tell you, but I just don't like to be miserable. And so I will seek to find a little bit of the, the gold lining or the silver lining to the gloomy clouds. And I think that that helped me be less miserable than
mm.
many of my other shipmates.
I know a lot of people in the military who like to be miserable, so quite the opposite of
Mm.
you. I gotta say that little pep rally talk you gave, I think that was your first moment as a podcaster. That was like before you knew you were a podcaster, the little podcaster inside of you was like
Yes.
mindset talk. It was like
Yes.
that was that moment. I chuckled for those wondering why I chuckled when you said field day because I haven't heard that term in a while, and I heard
Mm.
that and I was like, ugh. 2 hours of cleaning the space that we clean for 45 minutes every morning. And then you talked about, yeah, sometimes in the military you find yourself as a overqualified custodian. I will say
Yeah.
you definitely you learn to clean. And I'll share my personal experience, which is just annoying. And I've shared it with some military leaders who are like, that's just stupid. But I had a rag and I was tasked with wiping down the counter. Pretty simple task, right? I mean, everyone's tracking. Chief says, no, no, do it this way. Shows me a certain way to fold a rag, this and that. I'm doing that. Senior chief, why are you doing it that way? Are you competent? Who taught you that? Do it this way. So you start doing it the way senior chief tells you. A master chief shows, I don't know how the whole chain of command just decided to in rank order,
In rank
finally
order. That it was very good of them
show
to do it
up
in that order.
and be
Yes.
like, you're leaving streaks if you fold it this way. Fold it this way, use this side, go in this motion. The FSO decides to show up. And my FSO, he called himself, we had to refer to him as the Great One. He had a cardboard cutout of himself in the galley. So that shows
Wow.
you his personality. The Great One demands a coffee. Who's bringing my coffee? You. Come take care of the Great
Wow.
One. And he had there was a cardboard
Whew.
cutout of him pointing at a complaint box slash suggestion box in the middle of the galley. And
Wow.
he got held accountable by a guy in reactor because he faked his rank to some new recruit trying to. I think he was like a flag officer, and he was telling this new recruit, "I'm an admiral, and you'll treat me as such," and something like that. So, yeah,
Wow.
FSO in charge of the galley. He called himself the Great One, and now we had plenty of people who had little nicknames and stuff, but that was a self-given. Referred to himself in the third person. The Great One needs a coffee. That's
Wow.
we've talked a lot about power trips in the military, and that's a good example. I prefer the MPs who think they're Marines or the gate guards who think they're Marines and top flight security, and they give you a hard time about scanning your cat card. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's we've all had our fair share. But point being, Chief told me one way, Senior Chief told me another,
That is
Master Chief.
crazy.
How
Wow.
many ways can you fold a rag to wipe down a counter? Let's be honest. There was square, rectangle, square, circular motion, square, straight motion. And you,
That
you
is
think to
crazy.
yourself, Mr. Whiskey, you're making this up. And because you're not going to believe this. One time I was dusting a overhead pipe and I had a chief come in and tell me how to do it. Then I had a senior chief come in and say, doing it wrong. And, of course, it's like, well, chief told me, well, I'm senior chief. Does chief have a star on top of his anchor?
Wow.
I don't think he does. Then you have your petty officer who's in charge of you come in and say, well, are they your, LPO or whatever, I'm in charge of you. But then
Yep.
a big rank comes in and says, what are you doing? And it's like, do you respect rank? Do you respect a position of authority? Here's what I do. I just clean the way a person tells me till the next person comes and tells me to clean it that way. And then I circle back around.
That seems like the
Now,
right way to do it. Yes.
I talked
Yep.
to a 20 years plus Army guy the other day, and he told me his response. And I said, oh, well, you have a higher rank than I did to speak that way. I said, you were in for over 20 years. He said to say this. Well, Master Chief, I think you should get on your chain of command about how you want it done and let them all know so they're not teaching me the wrong way. Make it clear to everyone how you want it instead of just telling me. Make sure the chain of command knows. And I was like, you know what? I'd love to, as back when I was an E4 at the time. Yeah, I'd love to have said that to Master Chief on my first day on the ship. Would have been great. Tell you
It
one
certainly
of the
would have set
first
the
things.
tone for more opportunities to clean. I'm certain. I'm very
Yeah.
confident of that.
He's like, great idea. You and all your fellow petty officers can come in this Saturday, and I can teach all of y'all how to clean properly. That's what that results in. That results in the quote, one team, one fight. And then
Yes.
Mr. Whiskey, Petty Officer Whiskey, ends up being the blame point for that.
Yep.
And then, that's a good way to be hated if everyone has to come in on their day off.
Very confident
Or
of that.
he would have said, "Why don't you research the best way to clean and you come in on a duty day and at muster briefing, you present it to everyone." on your day off. That you see there, you can't give Master Chiefs any opportunity for great ideas like this. So you just say, "Yes, Master Chief," and you start cleaning that way.
And
That's
you make it
that's my
happen.
survival method. If I was 20 years plus in the army and I had some kind of positional authority, then I could say, "Hey, Master Chief, I think we need to implement universal knowledge here." But yeah,
Indeed.
how many ways? I'm gonna write a book. How many ways can you clean a Navy ship? It's gonna be horror stories about cleaning.
There will be a lot.
Because I was gonna say, I'm sure have you had your fair share of any experiences like that? It sounds like you being a motivational speaker on the submarine, y'all had a pretty good time. So
Well, um, I certainly remember the times of being in the outboard during construction, cleanings, right? Because while Electric Boat had to clean the boat as well, we were very much, in all of those small spaces, trying to get that initial shipyard dirt and grime out.
right,
So that was definitely happening. And then, the nastiest stuff was going into the bilges to, get the oily water out and all the rest. And I was a thin enough guy that, I wasn't short, but I was thin. So therefore, oh, you can fit in there, or you can make your way around, which I think you probably have some experience with, being able to reach some of those other areas that others can't.
yeah. So you get the honor of being the
Yes,
only one who can clean that.
you get awarded the opportunity.
You get
Yes,
award, right. You get awarded the opportunity to serve the submarine like no one else can. It reminds
exactly.
me of there was a steam valve we needed to operate or clean, and it's a very tight space. The submarine I was on was 6 feet narrower than the modern ones. I was on a pretty old submarine, and 6 feet is a lot.
That is a
In
lot.
some mariner terms, that's a lot of room. Let's just say there's a lot of chiefs and shipyard workers I have met that we don't know how they got onto the submarine, how they got around the submarine. It's just a miracle.
Yep.
Because even I, as a skinny guy, had to sometimes turn sideways. And the submarine I was on was so tight and narrow. I said, if I don't know how we would put on firefighter gear and all this, but it worked somehow. But this particular steam valve space was very narrow, and my buddy, he would put about half of those yellow Domino sugar containers, not a sponsor, but he would get about half of those and put it on his oatmeal. And we would say, "Hey, you have some oatmeal on your sugar." And he
Wow.
ended up being he was in shape, if rounds of shape, and it was quite hardy.
Hmm.
And I went to clean his space. He goes, "No, no, 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 whiskey, I got this." And I said, "Well, respectfully, I think I should do it. You're gonna get stuck." And he's like, "You want to call me fat, this and that, F you, you're a cocksucker." Goes up there to clean, and a few minutes later, I hear, "Help! Help, whiskey, I'm stuck, help! Help! Get the baby oil, get the baby oil. I'm taking my uniform off. You gotta come pull me out. Come grab me by my
Wow.
sides and pull me out. Help!" And I said, "No, no. I'm you got this. I am just a skinny whiskey, and I'm just gonna stay down here and let you do your thing. You wanted the honor of cleaning there." And he's like, "Help! There's stuff spilling. It's like maple syrup. I'm getting more and more stuck." And I said, "Well, if uh if um if we go steaming for a little while, you might sweat enough water weight that you can wiggle your way out." But we heard the horror stories of people
Wow.
getting stuck and they had to get their clothes ripped off and oil poured onto them to escape. I don't know if you've ever, it sounds like you didn't have to deal with that, but have you ever seen anything like that? We've heard a lot of horror stories about that.
I've heard the stories, and my wife, she worked there. She worked in the shipyard for 23 and a half years.
Wow.
She had experienced or had seen a bunch of those kind of things, but she's pretty small as well, and so she was in a lot of those really tight spaces as well. But yeah, I don't recall any particular stories like that where it was the extreme. It was generally we'd be able to get folks out with, okay, just go slow, work your way around,
Right, right.
and kind of work folks out. But yeah,
So
but I've heard the stories.
you managed to go your whole Submariner career without having to get your clothes ripped off, right?
Correct. Yep, I can check that box.
Yeah, you had
That
to
is
think about
true.
it for a minute. I actually knew a couple guys who definitely weren't designed for cleaning those tight, narrow spaces, but those spaces were out of sight, out of
Mm.
mind for 2 hours during field day. So, yeah, I won't say who it was. If I ever find this guy, I'll talk to him. But there was a petty officer who crawled up into some piping and looked like he was cleaning, and his eyes were closed for 2 hours, and
Uh,
he ignored all the
that
warranties. If I
I
find that
have
guy, I'm gonna
partaken in
talk
that
to
kind of
him.
cleaning. I have done that. I will. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk to that guy because I remember he came down and someone said he had a red mark across his whole forehead, and if I ever find him, I'm gonna talk to him.
Yes.
We did get in trouble actually on my submarine. Now that I think about it, some chief or some higher up had decided to do a deep cleaning and participate, and they found a bunch of hidden printed memes taped in some
Mm.
space, and it was a meme. Oh, look at you being such a good little sailor for Big Daddy Chief cleaning all the way back here. And it was like a meme making fun of chiefs. And a chief found it and he was
Wow.
not happy. And of course, we had random toy soldiers and rubber ducks all throughout the submarine. And the worst was it wasn't even our crew. The way our sub worked was we had multiple crews going on and off. And we came after a new group of young, fresh tomfoolery. And they had taken a wooden board with a drawn face on it that was based off the cartoon Ed, Ed, and Eddie, where they had a plank that I guess they talked to, and someone had hid it in the ship, and the senior chief in charge of our crew found it, and he was not happy with the
Mm.
idea, quote, that the submarine was a place for reminiscing about old cartoons. We got
Wow.
talked to. It was found during our time on the sub from the previous crew, but we got talked to.
Yeah.
And then he
There you
goes, if
go.
I find anything else with a face drawn on it, and I knew a shipmate had dropped off a face with a rock with a smiley face and an angry face, making fun of senior chief in his office as a prank earlier that day. I said, oh no. I
Yeah.
said it is gonna be a long day. But yeah, so what I want to focus in on here, he talked about having a pretty good, naval career, being a motivational speaker and leader and really helping out your peers there and keeping all your clothes on. So pretty good submarine tour. The issue I've seen a lot, and I'm curious about your particular line of work, is that a lot of people get out of the military and what they did, there's no jobs for in the civilian world, or they really have to pivot. Being a radio man, how did you find the translation of your military resume to the civilian world?
So for me, it worked out pretty well. So because my transition was from the boat to the schoolhouse, and then I got out and picked up a job at Hughes Network Systems. So I was doing technical training for satellite communication systems. So for me, it worked out well. And then did that for 4 years. And then 9/11 happened. And so ended up getting laid off as a result. And then started working as a contractor for Naval Sea Systems Commander back to the Navy in developing the curriculum, computer-based training for the Virginia class submarine program, and then eventually went on to a federal career. So for me, it worked out because there was some touch points and commonality and being able to find something within that that experience parlayed into real work for.
Mm. But at the same time, you still had to stay with the military and the government to some extent, to a lot of extent. So how would you say, knowing what you did initially? for all the young and men and women who are radio men and women getting out of the military? I mean, are there other opportunities that don't involve having a federal job or working with the military or Navy? Because some of them want to get away from that, but what could they, do with that kind of stuff?
A lot of it's about framing and understanding what the meta skills are that you actually got. Where, so as a radioman, it was like an interview that I will always remember was with Qualcomm, and they asked a question as we were going through. They're like, so do you ever like take computers apart at your house, or did you ever take like radios apart and then put them back together? And I'm like, that is definitely not me. And they're like, all right, then we'll probably find somebody else, basically, which is exactly appropriate because I would not have been a good fit for that. But it's that meta skill of what did you actually learn and the capabilities in being able to translate that into the civilian world. Because there was another job that I was offered out of, let's see, yeah, it was out of the military. I was offered this job that I took down here in the DC area with Hughes Network Systems, but also as doing technical training for an X-ray company, and this would have been up in Wisconsin.
Mm,
So there was right that. So it was the skill of being a technical trainer. That's what was translatable, not so much just a radio thing.
right.
So I would encourage folks to take a step back a second and look at those meta skills that they are learning. And then how can those be applied to some of the much of the work that's out there?
Right, not just radio men and women, but for all the military rates,
Right, right.
especially those more niche skill-based
Yeah,
ones that are kind of military specific, so that's what I've heard a lot, and I think that's great advice. And I think if you have to work with someone on how to do that, or nowadays you probably just ask AI whether you work with AI or a career counselor, whoever it may be, on how do I draw out stuff from this resume? Like what can I analyze? And definitely talking to veterans such as Mr. Woodward here, talking to other people in the industry who transitioned, what they found the work and what kind of skills they have found because they definitely went through the same journey that you did of trying to find that transition and do it properly. Now, Mr. Woodward, we've talked about you leaving, doing a huge career post-military. You and I met at a podcasting conference. It had nothing to do with submarines. It had nothing
right.
to, it had to do with radio, I guess.
Yeah, there we go.
There
Yeah.
there was
Full
radio
circle. All
stuff
right.
involved. Had nothing to do with submarines or women though. So how did you and I end up meeting? I guess is the question I'm asking. I mean, obviously I know we talked and we were like, hey, Navy, but how is it that I ended up seeing you at a podcasting conference? Where does that all come into play?
Well, several years ago, I kept hearing successful people say some variation of change your questions, change your life. And
Mm,
I'm like, okay, that's cool. What exactly are these questions that I need to be pursuing such that I can now change my life? And because I might read a couple in a book or hear one or two on a podcast. And so I created the Curated Questions website as a repository for collecting these questions that I was finding in all these different sources, such that now I could journal on them or I could apply them and help kind of check my mindset on things that I was struggling with. So that's where it started. And then the next evolution of this was having a conversation with people who really find great value in questions in their personal and professional life. And these are folks that are just very intentional about living with questions. And so now I've been having these conversations with a wide range of folks who really understand this. And what I would submit is that, or it is a meta skill. It is a skill that anyone can develop. And by virtue of having these conversations, it's building up an ecosystem of encouraging more and more conversations. And there was an example of a connection that I made online, and she was doing a job interview the following day, and she cast the net wide. She said, "Hey, does anybody have any good questions for job interviews?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I have a website. Go check this out. There's a section for both sides of the interview table." And I said, regardless of whether you have the courage to ask all of the questions for, she should be the interviewee, talking with the interviewer, whether you have the courage to ask them all, at least by virtue of going and sitting with these questions and thinking through how you might answer them, that will give you additional courage to go in when you have the interview, and it'll give you other thoughts of other concerns that you may or may not have, but it gives you a little bit more of a framework. And she went in and she did exceedingly well. The feedback was your questions were amazing. And that's what I'm seeking to do, is to encourage folks to engage with questions, ask them, follow your curiosity. So that's what I'm doing over on Curated Questions. And I just recently transitioned out as a federal worker, resigned, took the administration's offer, and now building out the coaching and speaking elements of kind of the Curated Questions platform.
Yeah, I really like the change your questions, change your life. And,
Mm,
one of the things we've talked about before on the show is how the questions you ask as an interviewer reflect you in the company. So I remember like I've had some interviews that were an hour. I've had some that were 5 minutes. The 5 minute ones were, can you work? When can you work? You're hired.
mm,
You know,
yep.
the other ones, the interviews that I found much better were, and this question I got asked, I really liked it was, Mr. Whiskey, what is not on your resume that you can tell me about you? You've got pages of both blue and white collar skills, very qualified individual, post-military. But what can you tell me that's not here? And my buddy, he struggles with answering questions in interviews. So I asked him the same question, and he goes, uh, not much, just that I'm a loyal employee and a hard worker. And so, of course, I had to crack down on him with an even more difficult question since he gave what I felt like was a poor answer. I said, how do you quantify and value hard work, and how does that separate you from your peers? And then he was like, so it's definitely interesting. But the questions can really reflect a good interview. And we talked recently in an episode about asking good questions and interviewing the interviewer as much as they're interviewing you, right? Because if you're going to
Mm.
be committing to this company, you need to know as much as you can, but also asking the appropriate questions. We talked about how some people come in asking, so how soon or how can I get more vacation days than I'm allotted initially? Like, and frame certain questions that can be, if not explained properly, can definitely cause some concern. But I want to go over your website because it has a variety of features, including like the curated questions page where you have different topics.
Mm.
And when you click on them, it comes with a list of questions curated for that topic. Uh, like, for example, you have suicide, keep it going, death, the interview, metrics, leadership. Is the plan to continue to expand and have more topics? And how can we leverage and utilize this in our lives?
So appreciate you highlighting the different areas. And yes, so for the record, I am fully attributional. So if I find out, and you'll see different categories or different areas there, if I find that someone, because if whoever wherever I get the question from, I attribute it because I'm not the guy that says that I've come up with all of these. And so what the categories continue to do is they continue to expand. And anytime that I come across, whether it's someone mentions it to me or I come across a question, I'm adding to them so that it continues to grow. And the key thing that I would say about questions is that spend time with them and investigate them. And you're probably going to find that a particular question resonates a bit more than another. So, a quick story was at the podcast movement last year. I was talking with, or I'd lined up a meeting with a executive at one of the companies, and my normal process is that I fan out my business cards that have questions on them, and then people just choose whatever card. So it's completely random. And a question that was that they chose was Jerry Colonna's question, and that was that he's really kind of known for, and that is, how have you been complicit in creating the circumstances you say you don't want? And it's not
Mm,
fully responsible, it's complicit. So it's a partial, right? But how have you been complicit? And this individual picked the card, they looked at it, and they were like, wow.
right.
And then they put it down on the table, and then we kept talking. And then they paused a second, and they looked back at the card, and they said, this changes everything about what I'm doing. And it's like, wow. And before we left, they said, just for the record, I was going to quit my job until I saw this question.
Wow.
That was the perfect question for them right then. And so, by virtue of working with questions, being around them, letting them be a part of your life, and you going into the corners, understanding, what am I afraid to feel? What conversations should I be having that I'm not? If you really sit with those questions, they will change your life. But it's not, because folks can look through any of these particular categories and you can read through them in 20 seconds or a minute or whatever it is. But if you take the time to sit with them and then also figure out your own, venture into the dark corners. What am I really wrestling with? So that is the invite that questions hold. The easiest part is to get the question. The hard part is to really engage with the question and suck all the marrow out of that bone that you'd be wrestling with.
Right. You never know how we've talked a lot on the show about how a single conversation can change a life. Technically, my whole podcasting career and show comes back to a single question that
Mm,
I'm gonna propose to you, I guess,
yeah.
actually. But yeah, just to continue going over your website real quick. I personally love the famous questions page, which is just you have a list of questions that were asked by famous people from Ronald Reagan to Jesus Christ to William Shakespeare, and I had taken a look through them and great questions. Some of them very recognizable. And then I just want to go over kind of the style of your show, how that works, what we can expect with each episode.
For the show, it really, the requirement is that that questions have been a big part of your life. So a recent episode was with Lisa Wimberger, and she was struck by lightning on her 15th birthday, and she had non-epileptic seizures until she was 38. And her process out of stopping those seizures was following questions and asking and pursuing, because doctors told her that there really wasn't any hope. And her only solution was to stay hydrated and don't and lower your stress. And she was having seizures that were she was going unconscious. I mean, these were extreme seizures. And she used questions to pursue neuroscience and the meditative practice that she was having, or that she had had since she was 12. She married those two together to figure out how she could regulate her nervous system and heal herself
Mm.
and understand how her body functioned. That was how questions worked for her. Um, a recent one, Chad Littlefield, he is a guy that talks about connection with people. So then and he has a set of 60 cards that he goes and does events with to be able to help people connect. Seth Godin was, if I will just encourage any human to understand and learn more about Seth Godin. He is such a generous human and such a curious human. And so always been about questions. And like one of his primary questions in his recent book, This is Strategy, is what is the change you seek to make? So if you think about that in podcasting or your work or in your family, what is the change you are seeking to make? It's such a simple question, but if you sit with it, you'll find that it just has these tendrils that go everywhere for you to be able to have a strong one. And then what I'm also going to be doing here in going forward is be doing more single episodes also. And an example of that is the question or the single episode I did regarding an impactful question that Ronald Reagan asked is, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And that has become a perennial question in politics. Whether you like
Yeah.
Reagan or
Yeah, of
not, it
course.
doesn't matter. It's that question is now, if you're a politician, you have to have an answer to that question. And so this is where the conversation goes in expanding questions. Let's just build out this world and encourage really working on that meta skill of questions.
Yeah, and honestly, what perpetuates science forward and a lot of stuff is the idea of questions. Science is just a bunch of people having questions and then trying to answer them.
Yes.
Obviously, there's theories and other stuff, but think about like the whole idea of Frankenstein. Can we bring back someone from the dead? Can we make a body?
Mm.
It all starts with questions, and every relationship. Will you be working for this company? Will you marry me? Will you go out with me? Some of us are too chicken to ask questions like, will you go out with me? I won't name names, but Mr. Woodward, that's you.
Exactly.
I
Well,
think
I
it's
answered it. I answered it immediately.
yeah,
So I took that one straight on. But yes,
yeah.
yes.
But what I do want to say is one of my personal favorite book and one of the biggest books of all time, the Bible, is full of questions. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
the Bible is God and Jesus Christ proposing questions to humanity, especially in the book of Job. And that's the book of Yonah. It ends with a question, and I love that it ends with that question and it leaves it unanswered. A lot of the questions in the Bible are left open-ended to some degree or
Mm-hmm.
answered somewhere else. So I love that. But to go back to the origin of my show, Mr. Woodward, I'll tell you the question that kind of created my show, which was, and you may have heard of this, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in October of 2021 is when it became a very popular subject. It was trending online. And the question is, would you accept this deal where you are given a million or you're given millions of dollars and made immortal in exchange for spending the rest of your life hunted down by a snail with a fatal touch, so that the only thing that can kill you is this snail, but you are immortal, you get millions of dollars. Will you take this deal? And that is
Hmm.
the question that technically started off my entire journey as Mr. Whiskey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I had not heard that question before and had no idea that was the origin story for you. Wow.
And how it ties in is that a lot of people were debating the question. They were talking about this and that, and they had more questions, follow-up questions before they just took the deal. Nuclear operators are smart, strange individuals who are good at thinking of things that no one else has and being theoretical and overly technical. And we were a couple of nukes sitting around, not on duty, not in the ship, not in uniform, discussing this meme that was trending. And nukes did what they did best. They got into genetic science. They got into cosmic rays. They got into evolution theories. They got into radiation theories. Everything and everything that could possibly happen with immortality in a snail. I mean, we just
Wow.
nuked it out. There's a term called nuking it
Yep.
in the Navy, and we nuked it out. And I said, this should be a podcast. A couple of nukes nuking out life, having these crazy conversations that are just to a level that civilians can't have. And so was born the idea for couple of nukes. Obviously, it didn't end up being the ultimate nuking it out platform. But if it had not been for that question, would you accept the deal of millions of dollars in immortality in return for being hunted down by a mortal fatal snail? If it had not been for that question, we would have never had that conversation. And that conversation was really the pivotal moment of where I was like, couple of nukes.
There we go.
So that's not to say maybe, hey, maybe I would become a podcaster either way. I think, are podcasters born or are they made? I don't know. That's a good question to ask. But yeah, so I can actually, the power of questions. And so that leaves me with, firstly, we're going to have your website in the description below for everyone to check out. I highly encourage everyone to check it out because the curated questions and famous question sections, I think sometimes we don't know that we need a question in our life. And sometimes, like you
Beautiful.
said, it could just change us. So how I want to end this episode differently than any episode prior, I want to end it with a question curated from the curated questions master himself, Mr. Woodward. I would love for you one, a single question that you could leave the listeners. So, I mean, we are listening from around the world. We all have different origin stories, different points of our lives where we're at, where some of us are men, some of us are women, some of us are young adults, some of us are old folks. What is a single question that you want to leave us with that could be applicable to all of us and none of us at the same time, but give us something to think about and may change our life? And I know I'm putting you on the spot. I should have told you to come prepared, but
This is actually easy, and it was the one that I just talked about by Seth Godin. Please check out the website for others. But Seth's question, what is the change you seek to make? So the encouragement is you're a living, breathing human. The odds of you being created and living today, being the person that you are, having the influence that you have, the odds just, they're incredibly low, but it happened. You have the
mm,
relationships you have the experience that you have the gifts that you have. So, what is the change you seek to make? You're here for a reason. Humanity needs you. I need the solutions that you bring to the world. I need your joy. I need everything that you bring. So, please identify what that change is you seek to make and go do it.
wow, I like that one. So, ladies and gentlemen, please ponder that. You don't have to answer right away, but think about it. Actually think about it. And with all the questions on the website, like we said, you could read through the list in a couple of minutes, but it's about, are you really digesting them? Are you really thinking about them? Because there's an answer we can give right off the bat always. But what is that deeper, truer answer to the
Mm-hmm.
question, and how will that affect our lives? But Mr. Woodward, I appreciate you coming on here. A little long-winded of me, but we were reminiscing about the Navy. Not something I get to do often. I should
Covered a
the
lot of
American
ground.
Legion more. But it was great to have that conversation, to pull out life advice from it, to pull out some funny stories, to hear about your journey, and then to end it with what you're doing now, which is not just curating questions, but cultivating growth and expansion for people to improve their lives. So I appreciate what
Absolutely.
you're doing, and I see, like we mentioned, you're just going to continue to ask more and more questions. So appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you and appreciate your audience and the work that you are doing. And so thank you for making this difference to your audience. I appreciate you, my friend.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, the source of great pride.